I have spent my entire life being the quiet one. Not the loud one, not the dramatic one, not the one who demanded things at family gatherings or made speeches over dinner. That was always Diane. My older sister had a talent for filling every room she walked into with noise and certainty. And our family had spent decades learning to orbit around her like satellites around a sun that burned too bright. I never minded. Truly, I did not. Some people are built to lead and some are built to watch. I was always the one watching. I noticed things other people missed. The way my mother's hands would shake slightly when Diane raised her voice. The way Todd, Diane's husband, would disappear into the kitchen whenever tension started to build. The way the family had slowly, quietly accepted that Diane's version of events was the only version that mattered. And for years, that version included me being absolutely nothing. I had a small apartment on the other side of town, a simple job that paid enough to cover my expenses without drawing any attention. I did not post much on social media. I did not attend gatherings unless someone specifically reminded me about them. I lived a life that most people would describe as unremarkable, and I was genuinely comfortable with that description. Diane used to joke about it at family dinners. "There goes our sister," she would say to whoever was listening with that particular laugh that was half amusement and half contempt. Living her tiny little life, never bothering anyone, never doing anything either. People would laugh, not because it was funny, because it was easier than questioning it. The beach house sat on a stretch of coastline about 40 minutes outside the city. It was not enormous. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a kitchen that looked directly out over the water. My father had bought it 30 years ago with money he had saved carefully over the course of his career. He was not a wealthy man. He was a disciplined one. He worked for the same company for 26 years, lived modestly, spent almost nothing on himself, and put money aside with the kind of quiet patience that people like Diane could never quite understand. He loved that house more than almost anything else in his life. He used to sit on that porch in the evenings with a glass of whiskey, watching the light change over the water, and he looked more at peace there than anywhere else I ever saw him. Sometimes I would sit with him. We did not talk much during those evenings. We did not need to. My father and I shared a particular kind of comfort that existed in silence, and those evenings on the porch were some of the best hours of my childhood. Diane never liked the beach house. She found it too quiet, too isolated, too far from the things she actually cared about. She visited maybe once or twice a year, stayed for a weekend, complained about the slow internet, and left. My father noticed this. He noticed a lot of things that he never mentioned out loud. He died 4 years ago. Quietly, the way he did everything, he was found sitting in his armchair at home on a Tuesday morning, a book still open in his lap. The doctor said it was his heart. It happened fast, and he did not suffer. And somehow that made it both better and worse at the same time. Better because he was not in pain. Worse because none of us got to say goodbye properly. He was just gone suddenly and completely. And the world kept turning as if nothing had changed. After the funeral, the family had a meeting about the estate. It was held at Margaret's house, my mother's place, around her big kitchen table. Diane sat at the head of the table like she had inherited the role along with everything else. Todd sat beside her, nodding along to everything she said. My mother sat quietly drinking tea, deferring to Diane on every point. A cousin named Patricia showed up briefly, asked about whether there was any jewelry, was told no, and left within 20 minutes. I sat at the far end of the table and said very little. Diane had opinions about everything. The savings accounts, the car, the furniture, and the beach house, especially the beach house. "Obviously, this is a family asset," Diane said, leaning forward with that particular expression she wore when she had already decided something, and obviously, I should be the one managing it. I have the most experience with property. I know people in real estate. This is just the logical choice. Nobody disagreed. My mother nodded. Todd said something about it making sense. I watched my watch for a moment, then looked back up at Diane and said nothing. That was the beginning. Over the next 2 years, Diane moved into the beach house like it belonged to her. She brought her furniture. She repainted the walls a shade of gray that my father would have hated. She replaced the old kitchen fixtures with something modern and sleek and completely out of place with the rest of the house. She had the porch railings refinished. She put in a new outdoor shower near the deck. She posted photographs of the property all over her social media, tagging it with her name, her location, her life. Nobody questioned it, not publicly, not to her face. My mother called me once late at night and mentioned in passing that she felt uneasy about the whole situation. But when I asked her what specifically bothered her, she could not quite put it into words. She just said Diane knows what she is doing and changed the subject. I understood. Margaret had spent 40 years married to a man who handled things quietly and kept the peace. Fighting openly did not come naturally to her. It never had. Todd began referring to the beach house as theirs in every conversation. At family dinners, at holidays, at the small gatherings that families hold for no particular reason other than obligation and guilt. Our beach house, he would say. And the words settled into the air like they had always been there, like there was never any question about it. Like the house had always been his and Diane's and nobody else's. I kept my mouth shut. I kept watching and I kept checking certain things quietly on my own time. There were documents in my possession. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to understand what my father had done and why and when. Enough to know that the right moment had not yet arrived. Patience was something I had inherited from him. It was perhaps the only thing. The first real crack appeared in March. Diane called a family dinner at Margaret's house, another big kitchen table gathering, and announced that she had decided to sell the beach house. The market was good, she said. Prices on coastal properties had been climbing steadily for the past 18 months. She had already been in contact with a real estate agent named Linda Marsh who specialized in coastal properties and had already expressed strong interest in listing it. Linda had come recommended by a colleague of Todd's and Diane had met with her twice already before mentioning anything to the rest of the family. I have been thinking about this for a while, Diane said, cutting her chicken with precise, confident strokes. The maintenance costs are getting ridiculous. And, honestly, none of you are using it. So, the smart thing to do is sell it, take the money, and split it evenly among the family. Everyone benefits. Everyone walks away happy. Todd raised his glass slightly, as if toasting the idea. Margaret looked at her plate and nodded slowly, though something in her expression flickered. A brief, unreadable tightness around her eyes that disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. I set my fork down. Have you looked at the deed? I asked quietly, calmly, the way I always ask things. Diane looked at me with an expression I had seen 100 times before. It was not quite annoyance. It was something closer to pity mixed with impatience. The look you give someone who has just said something embarrassingly irrelevant at a dinner party. The look that says you are not part of this conversation, and we are all too polite to remind you. The deed is in Dad's name, she said. And since he is gone, it passes to the estate which I am managing. So yes, I have looked at the deed. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her chair, but said nothing. You are a leech, Diane said, and her voice was flat and certain. Not angry. Exactly. More disgusted. The way someone might say it about a stain on a tablecloth. You have always been a leech. You have never contributed anything to this family. You have never built anything. You have never earned anything. And now you want to sit here and question how I handle the one thing that Dad left behind. The table went silent. Todd looked at his plate. Margaret picked up her tea and held it with both hands like a shield. Even the air in the room seemed to shrink, pulling back from the words like it did not want to be associated with them. I looked at my watch. It was 6:47 in the evening. Okay, I said, and I picked my fork back up and finished my dinner without saying another word. The listing went live 2 weeks later. Linda Marsh was efficient, professional, and had already secured 2 serious inquiries within the first week. Diane posted about it on social media with a caption that read something along the lines of exciting new chapter for the family. The comments were full of congratulations from people who did not know the full story. Diane accepted each one with a brief, gracious reply that suggested she was doing something generous and selfless. Diane began planning a celebration. Not just any celebration, a party, a proper catered invitation sent out party to mark the occasion. She wanted to host it at the beach house itself. One final event before the sale closed. She called it a farewell gathering and spent 2 weeks organizing the details with the kind of energy she usually reserved for things that benefited her directly. She chose a menu. She selected a color scheme. She ordered custom napkins with a small monogram on them. Her monogram, not the family's. She invited the entire extended family. She invited friends. She invited colleagues from work. She invited Linda Marsh, who accepted graciously and said she would bring champagne. She even invited a few of my mother's old friends from the neighborhood, which Margaret interpreted as a thoughtful gesture and which was in reality simply about filling the guest list. I was invited too. Of course, it would have looked strange not to include me. Diane made a point of mentioning my name on the guest list in a tone that suggested she was being generous, even magnanimous, by doing so. I accepted the invitation. I confirmed my attendance, and I made one phone call that evening to a man I had not spoken to in several months. His name was Arthur Bellamy. He was a trust attorney based downtown with an office on the 4th floor of a building that smelled faintly of old carpet and expensive coffee. He was 63 years old, deliberate in everything he did, and had been handling a particular set of documents for me for the better part of 3 years. My father had introduced us. He had said simply, "This is Arthur. He is going to help you with something important. Listen to him carefully." I had listened. "Arthur," I said when he picked up the phone, "I need you at the beach house on Saturday. Bring everything." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then Arthur said in his calm, measured way, "I will be there at 7 o'clock sharp." Saturday arrived quickly. The weather cooperated as it sometimes does when the universe has a sense of timing. The sky was clear, the air was warm, and the beach house looked genuinely beautiful in the late afternoon light. Diane had hired a caterer, a small outfit from town that specialized in events like this, with white linens and platters of food that looked almost too elegant for a beach house porch. There were tables set up along the railing. There were strings of fairy lights woven through the posts and the railings. There was champagne on ice in several large buckets near the front door, and the whole place smelled faintly of lemon and fresh flowers. People began arriving around 5. Margaret came early, settling into a corner with a glass of white wine and the quiet, watchful posture that had become her default at family events over the past several years. She looked comfortable enough, though I caught her glancing toward the door twice before I arrived, as if she were waiting for something. Todd circulated through the crowd, shaking hands, telling people about the upcoming sale like he had personally brokered it himself. Linda Marsh arrived with 2 bottles of expensive champagne and a wide professional smile, and made her way toward Diane immediately. I arrived at 6:30. I wore a simple blue shirt and dark trousers. Nothing that would draw attention. I brought nothing except my phone and a small leather folder that I kept tucked quietly under my arm. Nobody noticed it. Nobody paid much attention to me at all, which was exactly how I preferred things. I found a spot near the edge of the porch, away from the main crowd, and I poured myself a glass of water from one of the pitchers on the table. I watched the sun begin its slow descent toward the water. I watched Diane laugh at something Linda said, her hand resting casually on Todd's arm, radiating confidence and ownership and ease. She looked like someone who belonged in this house completely, utterly in a way that no piece of paper could challenge. I watched Margaret glance at me from across the porch with an expression that was almost apologetic. I gave her a small nod and I watched my watch. At 6:48, Diane decided to make a toast. She tapped a knife against her glass, a sharp, clean sound that brought the crowd to attention. And she smiled the way she always smiled when she had the floor wide, warm, certain. "I just want to say thank you," she began, "to everyone here for coming tonight. This house has meant so much to our family, and I am so grateful that we were able to find a buyer who truly appreciates what this place is. Linda has been incredible through the whole process, and we are expecting to close within the next 2 weeks." People raised their glasses. Someone clapped softly. Linda smiled her professional smile and lifted her glass a little higher. "To new beginnings," Diane said. "To new beginnings," the crowd echoed. And at exactly that moment, at exactly 6:49, the front door opened. Arthur Bellamy was not a large man. He did not need to be. He was 63 years old with silver hair swept neatly to one side and round glasses that sat precisely on the bridge of his nose. He wore a dark navy suit slightly formal for a beach house gathering, but that was deliberate. Authority, Arthur had once told me, sometimes lives in the details. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had been with him for decades, worn at the edges, but solid, the kind of object that suggested reliability and seriousness. He walked up the porch steps with the unhurried, deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly where he was going and exactly why. He did not rush. He did not look around uncertainly. He simply walked up, set his briefcase down on the nearest flat surface, and surveyed the room with the calm attention of someone reading a document he had already studied many times before. His eyes found me first. I gave him a small nod. Then his eyes found Diane. "Good evening," he said, and his voice carried easily across the porch without him raising it. It was the kind of voice that commands attention simply by existing, not loud but clear, and weighted with the kind of quiet authority that comes from decades of doing one thing very well. "I am looking for the owner of this property." The porch went quiet, not immediately. It took a few seconds for the conversations to trail off, for people to turn toward the door, for the champagne glasses to lower slightly, but it happened quickly enough because there was something in Arthur's tone, something in the way he stood, in the way he held himself that suggested this was not a casual question. Diane stepped forward. She was still smiling, though the smile had shifted into something slightly confused, slightly guarded. "I am sorry. Who are you?" "My name is Arthur Bellamy," he said. He reached into his briefcase and produced a folder, thick, official-looking, marked with a seal that I recognized immediately. The seal of his firm, the seal that had been on every document I had read over the past 3 years. "I am the attorney of record for the trust that holds this property, and I need to speak with the legal owner before any further action is taken regarding its sale." Linda Marsh, who had been standing 3 feet away with a champagne glass in her hand, went very still. Her professional instincts kicked in invisibly. A slight tightening of her posture, a shift in her expression from relaxed to alert. Diane's smile did not disappear entirely, but it changed. It tightened at the corners. Her eyes moved from Arthur's face to the folder in his hand and back again. "I am the one managing the estate," she said. And there was an edge now in the confident tone. "So you can speak with me." Arthur looked at her for a moment, a brief, unhurried moment. Then he turned slowly and deliberately and looked directly at me. "Are you the individual named in the trust document as sole beneficiary and property owner?" he asked. I set my glass of water down on the railing. I straightened up. The leather folder I had been holding all evening, the one nobody had noticed, stayed tucked at my side. I did not need it. Arthur had everything, and I said clearly and without any hesitation whatsoever, "Yes, I am." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that does not fill itself quickly. It was heavy. It was uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence where every person in the room is recalculating something fundamental about the situation they are standing in. Recalculating the past 2 years, recalculating every conversation, every assumption, every moment they had nodded along without questioning. Arthur walked toward me with the folder and opened it on the porch railing, turning it so that the documents faced outward, visible to anyone who wanted to look. I did not need to read them. I had read them dozens of times, but I let him explain because this was not for my benefit. This was for everyone else's. "This is a revocable trust established by the late Gerald, the father, approximately 18 months before his passing," Arthur began, his tone even and professional, the way it always was when he was working. "The trust designates this property, the beach house, and the associated land parcel, as being held in trust for the sole benefit of one individual." He tapped the relevant page gently with one finger. "This individual, not the estate, not a shared family asset, a private trust with a single named beneficiary, established with the full legal authority and intent of the property's original owner." He paused. Let that settle into the air. The trust was established with full legal documentation, witnessed and notarized by 2 independent parties, and has been maintained and administered through my office continuously since its creation. It is entirely separate from the general estate, which is why it did not appear in the initial estate proceedings. It was never meant to. Diane's face had gone through several stages in the space of about 30 seconds. Confusion first, genuine unguarded confusion, then disbelief, then something harder and colder that settled into her jaw and her eyes like frost forming on glass. "That is not possible," she said. Her voice was still controlled, but there was an edge to it now, a tremor underneath the certainty that had not been there before. Dad never mentioned a trust. Nobody mentioned a trust, not once. That was his intention, Arthur said simply. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. The documents spoke for themselves. Linda Marsh cleared her throat. She had moved slightly away from Diane. A small but unmistakable shift in positioning. The kind of subtle repositioning that happens when someone is calculating their own exposure to a situation that has just changed dramatically. "I need to pause the listing immediately," she said, pulling out her phone with a calm efficiency that suggested she had dealt with complications before. If the property is held in a trust that was not disclosed during the initial conversations, then the sale cannot proceed as planned. "I am sorry. I should have been given accurate ownership documentation from the very start." She said it with the careful, professional composure of someone who understood exactly how serious the situation was and was already thinking about her own position within it. Margaret, from her corner of the porch, set down her wine glass with a soft click. Her face was pale, but her expression was not one of shock. It was something quieter, something that looked almost like relief. Todd opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again, as if hoping that a second attempt might produce words that made more sense. "Diane," he said quietly, as if hoping to have a private conversation in the middle of a crowded porch. "Did you know about this?" Diane did not answer him. She was staring at the documents on the railing, reading them with the kind of intense focus that suggested she was looking for a flaw, a loophole, anything at all that might change what they said. But Arthur Bellamy had been practicing trust law for over 30 years, and there was nothing there to find. The documents were clean. They were clear. They were final. The party ended within the hour. It did not end dramatically with shouting or tears or any of the theatrical confrontations that television dramas would suggest. It ended quietly. Slowly, people began to feel uncomfortable with the tension that hung over the porch like weather. They finished their drinks. They set down their glasses. They said awkward goodbyes and thanked Diane for the evening, out of habit mostly, and left in ones and twos. Glancing back at the porch with expressions ranging from curiosity to secondhand embarrassment to something that looked a lot like relief that it was not their family standing in this particular moment. Linda Marsh left last among the guests. After spending 20 minutes on the phone with her office, speaking in low measured tones near the side of the house before she walked to her car, she stopped and turned back toward me. "I owe you an apology," she said. Her tone was genuine, embarrassed, but professional. "I should have verified ownership more thoroughly before listing. I assumed the information I was given was accurate. That is on me, and I will make sure it does not happen again. The listing will be officially withdrawn by tomorrow morning, and I will send written confirmation." I thanked her, she nodded, held my gaze for a moment, and left. Arthur Bellamy stayed until the very end. He walked me through the next steps in a low, calm voice while we stood near the railing, looking out at the water the way my father used to. The evening had cooled. The fairy lights were still on, casting a warm glow over the empty tables and the half-finished plates of food that nobody had bothered to clean up. The trust was valid. The property was mine, had been mine legally and completely since the moment my father signed the documents 18 months before he died. The sale that Diane had been orchestrating was void. It had never been hers to authorize. The renovations she had made, the money she had spent, the listing fees Linda would invoice. All of it was Diane's responsibility. None of it could be charged to an estate that had no legal claim to the property. "Your father was very deliberate about this," Arthur said after a long pause. He was looking out at the water the same way I was. He spent a long time deciding, months actually. He wanted to make sure the house went to the person he knew would take care of it quietly, without drama, without it becoming a battlefield. I looked out at the water for a long time after he said that. The waves moved in and out against the shore, steady and unhurried, the way they had for longer than any of us had been alive. Diane called me the next morning. It was early, before 8. Her voice was different from the way it had been the night before. The certainty was gone entirely. In its place was something I had rarely heard from her in my life. Something stripped down and raw and unfamiliar. She was afraid. "I need to talk to you," she said, "about the listing fees and the renovations I did and the money I already spent on the party and all of it." I listened to her talk for a long time. She had spent a significant amount of money on the property over the past 2 years. The renovations alone had cost tens of thousands. The furnishings, the maintenance, the party, the custom napkins, all of it had been spent on a property she did not own, had never owned, and had no legal authority to modify or sell. Linda Marsh was going to send an invoice for the listing and marketing work that had already been completed. The caterer was going to send a bill, and none of those costs could be redirected to an estate that had no claim to the property. They were Diane's costs. Diane's responsibility. Diane's problem. "I did not know," she said. And for the first time in my life, I believed her completely. She genuinely did not know about the trust. My father had kept it quiet the way he kept most important things quiet. He had not told Margaret. He had not told Diane. He had told no one except Arthur. And he had trusted Arthur to keep it that way until the right moment. "I know," I said. There was a long silence on the line, the kind that takes up space. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I looked out the window of the beach house. My beach house. At the morning light hitting the water. The same view my father had loved. The same light he had watched change 1,000 times from this exact spot. "I am going to think about it," I said, "and I am going to take my time." I hung up the phone. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee in the same chair my father used to sit in. The waves moved in and out against the shore, steady and unhurried, the way they always had, the way they always would. The air was cool and smelled like salt. And the morning.